We've got another great story to share with you today, an inspiring journey into local government leadership, because that's what we do here on the Halting Winter podcast. We tell the stories behind the titles, the unique paths into public service, and the moments that shape how these leaders show up, even when the work gets heavy. Every day, local government quietly makes modern life possible, and behind every service is a person doing work that often goes unseen. This is the Halting Winter podcast, and I'm Seth Winterhalter. Every week, I have the pleasure of sitting down with local government leaders from across the country that remind us where government really lives, locally, doing the work that truly matters. This is the work that builds belonging. Before we hear today's conversation, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Tyler Technologies has been exclusively serving the public sector since 1998, partnering with cities and counties to make their work more manageable, more connected, and more effective. From smarter budgeting to artificial intelligence, Tyler equips local governments with software and solutions that help leaders serve with clarity, efficiency, and impact. You can explore a variety of free resources at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter. And if today's conversation resonates with you, I want to invite you to check out the Municipal Leadership Development Circle. It's a global community of local government leaders who are committed to growing together, supporting one another, and leading well in the middle of municipal pressure. You can learn more about the MLDC at haltingwinter.com/MLDC. That's haltingwinter.com/MLDC. And now, let's turn to today's conversation. My guest on the podcast today is Elisa Cox, city manager in Rancho, Cucamonga. That makes me want to dance every time I say it. I love it. Elisa, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on today.
All right, Seth, I'm going to give you the one-liner I give to a lot of new rooms of people that I just met. So if you want to edit this out of the podcast, you can, or you can leave it in. Is pronounced Elisa.
Elisa.
Elisa. Yes.
Elisa. See, this is great because now we get, because that's why I always want, in fact, I usually start by asking you to say your name. But this is good. Elisa.
Yes.
Very strong. It was excellent. Elisa Cox. And did I say Rancho Cucamonga right?
Absolutely. You did.
So is it two? And I care about this because when you have a last name like Winterhalter, again, it gets abused in so many ways. Spelling, it's amazing how many people put in the most random of letters in that. So I love that. Elisa Cox.
I decided a few years ago that, I didn't have to keep telling people like, it's okay, you can call me whatever. I usually respond. I was like, no, I've got a cool name. I want to know about my name.
Exactly. I love it. Well, Elisa, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you, Seth. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, we're going to have a great conversation because not only is your story, I think, amazing, but it's going to be particularly, I think, helpful for two audiences that we really want to hit on right now. So if you are a student and you have no idea, maybe you're a young person, either in high school, college, you have no idea what's going on in life. You have no idea. You're trying to figure it out. Where do I find passion and purpose? I think your story is a unique opportunity to see how you can take steps to dip your foot into local government. Because I think a lot of young people have no idea that there are all these part-time jobs, summer jobs, opportunities for you to, through parks, through recreation, through day camps. I mean, it's just amazing how many things our city is doing, which not only highlights the opportunity for jobs, but I think it also reminds us that our city is doing so much work to build community, to offer the opportunity for people individually to have things to do, to participate in the life of all this stuff that our community does, but also to come together and to do life together, which I think is so vital and so important in these times where it seems like we live kind of hyper individualistic lives. We're kind of pushed that way. I think we need community, and I think local government's the heartbeat of that. So I think
you are speaking my love language. Everything that I do and my staff, I'm sure, actually, I don't think they get tired of it. I think they appreciate it, but it always comes back to the community and what are we doing to serve and how are we enriching people's lives, or how are we best navigating whatever it might be, whether it's state regulation or just unfortunate circumstances. How are we doing that in a way that's going to go back and serve our community and make, our communities better, stronger?
I love that. And the other thing I think will be interesting to the audience and maybe inspiring is your path to city management at least from what I read, and that's why you'll correct us, it doesn't seem like you set out from like college once you kind of learned of local gov to be like, I'm going to be a city manager. It seems like you kind of weave in and out of all these different areas into this. And so it's going to be interesting. I hope it'll be interesting for someone who's already in local gov who might have never thought about the city management office to think, hey, there's ways, or people who go, well, I'm not this or that, and so I can't get to that. So why would I even be interested in that? And I think your story is going to help maybe shine some light on what that.
If I'm being honest, I think I spent more years protesting that I would never become a city manager than actually preparing to be a city manager.
That kind of is a theme I hear on many of these podcasts. And so, well, and that's the thing too. We'll talk about being an assistant city manager. It seems like people are very aware now that the city manager role is a lot different, especially in just the heat it takes it's a risky position. And if you have young kids, who wants that risk of having to move? And it's not like you get to take another job in your city. There's only one city manager in your city. So, we've got so much to talk to. But before we get to the incredible path of your professional career, let's go back to the very beginning and tell us about where you were born and kind of the childhood that shaped you and led you into this dynamic career.
I was born in Northern California. Actually, my parents were living in Moraga at the time. I did not spend a whole lot of time there. I like to say that we moved 7 times by the time I was 7, up and down the state of California. Some of that might have been houses. I don't think we actually lived in 7 different, communities, but when I was 7, my parents settled in Sierra Madre, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. It's about 3.2 square miles nestled up against San Gabriel Mountains, just east of Pasadena and north and west of Arcadia, along the 210 corridor for those Southern California people. And I had a fantastic childhood there. My early love became the swimming pool. I started on swim team when I was 8 or 9 years old. I watched the junior lifeguards practice as they were, doing their things. And I couldn't wait to become old enough to become a junior lifeguard. And then by the time I did, the program had been canceled because small city, budget cuts, whatever it might have been. And my mom told me, she goes, well, if this is something you really want to do, then you should go ask. And I'm like, but it doesn't exist anymore. She's like, sometimes you just need to ask. And so she stood by me as I, worked up the nerve to go ask the pool manager if I could be a junior lifeguard, even though there wasn't a program anymore. And now, later in life, I'm well aware that anytime that somebody comes up to someone in local government offers to volunteer, that's almost a guaranteed yes. But, my 12-year-old self was not quite aware that, this low risk situation. It felt very high risk at the time. So that was my first. Go on.
No, yeah. Let me. This is such a great point because I've heard in the news, not only here in Olympia, where I'm at in Washington, but also in various other communities, these issues of funding and the pool. A lot of people have no idea that the city actually is the owner and the caretaker and the steward of the pool. And so speak to that. I think that's a great point to highlight that will allow, because what you hear oftentimes is, well, I never use the pool, so why do I care? And again, it's this individualistic thinking. You hear this with schools. So, baby boomers who now don't have kids and they go, well, I don't like paying taxes because, it's like, but your kids were part of the school. And even if you don't have kids, I'd rather have kids in school learning than out doing trouble. And it's kind of like that pool is also that resource. Talk about the importance of those.
It's libraries, it's parks, it's the gamut of it. Most of my career to this point was spent in Sierra Madre, which is at the time I was there, I think it had 68 full-time employees, $5 or $6 million budget. I mean, we're talking pretty small. And one of the things that I had to do, which is probably to date one of the more difficult on a personal level, was actually being directed by the city council to do an RFP to contract out the pool. And the pool is no longer city operated there. It is operated now by the YMCA in that public-private partnership model. As tax dollars only go so far, and each of our states has constraints on how various taxes are put into place, can be used. Prop 13 froze things in California back into the 70s. And while Sierra Madre still received a higher share of property tax, it has very little retail. And so no opportunity to supplement that, or very little opportunity, I should say, especially when I was there, to supplement that with sales tax. And so, we see it now. I've been working on it in my city now. Expenses start outpacing revenues. And once that happens, it's really hard to pull it all back in and to keep things in line. It is a puzzle every single year when it comes down to budget. And yes, people get very either defensive or dismissive depending on their experiences. For somebody like me who grew up at the pool, like that is just an incredibly special and, for me, life-changing place and thing and opportunity. And who knows if I would have ended up in this place without it. Libraries, very similarly, we talk about places where people can get their first jobs. Library pages are another great one. Public works, there's, a lot of part-time employees often in that space too. And again, just based off of whether you have that interaction, you have that personal experience with it or not, tends to really determine if it's something that you are very passionate about having or potentially dismissive or passionate about not having. And every community is going to balance that a little bit differently.
It's one of the things I'm trying to encourage cities. We just become better storytellers because I think that's the only way we can get into the hearts of those people who maybe don't have the experience, is to share not only the stories, but also to share that lens of this is good for our community and our kids and our adults to have these spaces to do positive things. Because if we're not doing positive things, hopefully we're not doing negative things, but we can be doing just apathetic things that don't, I think, lead to human flourishing. And these are those things that, again, not only give something for people to do, but they inspire, they encourage, they help us dream, they help us do so much more.
They absolutely do. But also, the city doesn't have to be all things to all people either, right? I really like taking that lens of what is it that nobody else can or is doing at a level that is approachable for the majority of the residents. We don't need to be in a swimming pool business if there are 6 other swimming pools in town and they are all offering swimming lessons at a level that most people can reach and afford. Swimming pools are expensive. They are money pits. You are never going, as a public agency, I have looked at it many different times and many different angles. I don't know how as a public agency you make money on a swimming pool operation. There's just too many constraints. But you still want to make sure that opportunity exists in your community, that there is a place to go learn how to swim, that there is a place to have those community gathering spaces. But I really like and actively take an approach of we don't have to do everything. We're just doing our best to make sure that the offerings exist within our community that build up those relationships, those memories, those skills that we need to have to be successful in life. But it doesn't always have to be us that's providing it.
That's such a great point. And it's also, even now, it can be, I'm sure that was kind of a gut wrench to have to do that RFP to take it into a public-private partnership. But I think that's what a lot of cities are having to do is look at public-private partnerships. And I think those are almost good too, because then it has the opportunity for the community to have some buy-in. But at the end of the day, that pool probably would have never been built if it wasn't a city initiative. Because like you say, getting something of that magnitude done, what business is going to take that on? So sometimes the city can be an instigator to something cool that then can turn into a public-private partnership. That's so cool. Okay.
Partnerships with school districts, whoever it might be. But yes,
totally.
we digress.
We can go on forever. I want to get to California Polytechnic State University, where you do your Bachelor's of Science in Recreation, Park, and Tourism Administration. Again, we had Leonard Hernandez on, I mentioned to you earlier, who's now the Thurston County manager, who's kind of a part of the area you're going to be in. He was a San Bernardino County executive, and he he talked about a library degree. It was like, well, a master of library. What in the world is this? And so here's an opportunity for a degree. But before we get there, what were you thinking? What was Elisa thinking when you were growing up? Elisa, sorry, I heard Elisa. What was Elisa thinking when you were growing up? What did you think the career path was going to be?
That's an interesting question. Let's see. What was I thinking was that I was having the time of my life being a lifeguard and swim instructor every single summer, and that all of my, maybe not all, but the majority of my best memories were, in that recreational space. And my parents had told me that I could go to a 4-year college and they would support that, but I needed to know what I was going to study. Otherwise, I could go to the JC and figure out what I was going to study and transfer. And I was dabbling in sociology and the idea of studying sociology. And we did a tour to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And my parents had both gone to school there. And in my head, I had scratched it off the list primarily because they had gone to school there for, which, my 17, 18-year-old mind, not fully formed. Who knows what I was really thinking and where that came from. But we went on the tour. And the tour guide said, I'm a recreation administration major. And I turned and I looked at my parents and I said, that's what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to go. And again, 17, 18-year-old brain. And they're like, yeah, you keep looking and you keep exploring. But I was dead set on that. That is where I saw my path in the recreational space. When I was in college, I would have told you that I was going to plan the Super Bowl someday. And now being a city manager, I can tell you that's not completely out of the range of things that city managers do in, working with Olympic committees, World Cup committees, FIFA, working with the Super Bowl. So, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that I will work on planning the Super Bowl. Maybe not in Rancho Cucamonga, but I also have zero plans of leaving here. So it's a toss up. I knew I wanted to go into a space where I was creating community, where I was impacting people's lives, where I was providing others the opportunity to laugh and to have great memories. And it really comes down to community for me. And that's what I saw that I could do in recreation administration.
Mm. It's so interesting you bring up the Super Bowl. I've reached out. There's a couple city managers in the Northern California in the Bay Area where they hosted the Super Bowl. And I said, we got to have you on because that's such a unique, aspect of, and one of them, I know, it was more kind of like what's going on now. I was just up in Seattle the other day and they have these two huge screens down by this enormous project that the city did, which is amazing. The project that has been done, if you've ever visited Seattle, where Pike, the market is, Pike's Market, and then you walk down now. They took out the huge highway and have done this amazing walk down to the pier, and it is gorgeous and stunning. And it shows you the power of government infrastructure to really, that place is, think about the hundreds of thousands of people just there over these weeks and engaging. And that's what's so cool. It's just so cool to see, especially the World Cup, because people from all over the world come and it's just like, we are one people. Like we're just here, we're having a good time. And the city is, again, has built the infrastructure for this cool, both under the ground and on top of the ground to bring these people together. So you're at this school, again, which is interesting. I just highlight Justin Hopkins, the GM for Stockton East Water District went here. Helen Ramirez, who was just on, she's the former city manager in Brownsville, Texas, now director of economic and local business development in San Marcos, Texas. So this school is and these people all did kind of different degrees too. So this school is kind of turning out some really heavy hitters in local gov. And I don't think anyone kind of was thinking that when they went in. So it's kind of
and as far as I know, they don't necessarily have a huge public policy program, but Cal Poly has that great learn by doing philosophy. And that's so much of what we do in local government too, right? Every day. And so there are a number of people I know in various local government spaces that have gone to either Cal Poly San Luis Obispo or Pomona, which is where I went for my master's degree. And just that hands-on, learn by doing philosophy, I think just really helps elevate a different kind of thought process and learning, which I am incredibly proud to be a part of. And then even today, being a part of the advisory council for what has now transformed into the experience industry management department. So recreation has continued to grow and evolve, and now it's about the experience industry. And it's a very great place to continue to have some of that influence on what are all the different experience industries out there. So, for some it is, sports. For others, it is hotels and travel and the like. For me, it is communities and how our people experience life every single day living in our city.
One thing I've learned from hosting hundreds of conversations with local government leaders is this: the challenges never stop changing. So many conversations seem to come back to the same question. How do you keep moving your community forward when there's never enough time, money, people, or certainty? You're always looking for ways to work smarter, make better decisions with limited resources, and prepare for what's coming next, all while still delivering the services your residents count on every day. That is why I'm grateful for partners like Tyler Technologies. Tyler has put together 3 free ebooks specifically for local government leaders that I think are well worth your time. One explores how your team can use AI to eliminate repetitive work and improve your efficiency. Another highlights how cloud technology can help modernize your operations. And the third focuses on how your organization can remain resilient, even when things don't go according to plan. You can download all 3 ebooks for free, along with several other resources, all at tylertech.com/winter. Again, tylertech.com/winter. And if you're going to be attending the NACO annual conference, it's in New Orleans this July, stop by booth number 231 and connect with the Tyler team. They would love to learn more about your community and the unique challenges that you are facing. While you're there, if you'd like to see how AI is being used in an actual government setting, make sure to attend the Technology Innovation Forum. It's featuring Fulton County and Tyler Technologies. You're going to hear how they are putting these tools to work in their day-to-day operations and what they're learning along the way. To learn more about AI that works to make your county or your city government far more efficient, visit tylertech.com/winter. Now, let's get back to the conversation. I think that this is one of the reasons why we just want more young people to listen to the podcast, because I think it should, the idea of doing either your undergrad or even your master's degree, which is more hands-on with its study, but it's also go find an internship, go get your feet wet in that environment. And local gov's such a perfect environment for young people because there's every department under the sun. We want to do something called the HaltingWinter tour, where we just tour the country and go to schools and just are and talk to students and say, I don't think there's an area that you have of interest, of passion, of skill that we can't find a home for in local gov. It is that expansive. From scientists.
I just said this the other day. Yes, I was just sharing this the other day. And we believe in that so passionately here. Our city council included is that we are working on a program called Pathways RC, which is how do we start resharing local government and what it does. And throughout, from cradle through career, going into the schools and other opportunities, internships and fellowships, and just that experience of knowing that you have a local government, the basics of civics, and all the different roles that, play in that, whether it is an engineer or an architect or recreation, the whole gamut. And we do spend some time already in the schools. Like, we've got some great programs with our environmental programs team, with our engineering team, in planning that go in and talk about things, but we want to expand that. I was sharing with somebody the other day, if you go into any given school and you ask them what's a city manager, I think they're going to give you a blank look unless their parent happens to be a city manager or deputy city manager, right? So how do we change that narrative, and how we go back in and share the great things that you can do and grow? And to your point, like, find your passion. We have it here. You want to be a nurse? We have nurses, right? Like, we run the gamut in the opportunities in local government for, not only to be able to pursue your passion where it comes to what you're interested in learning and growing in, but in service to the community as well. And I think that is what makes this industry so incredibly special, is that you find that professional passion, and you can tie that into service. And a lot of people are looking for service. A lot of people really want to serve, and make others' lives, better.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's why it's important not only that we encourage young people to see the opportunities in local gov, but I think there's plenty of people that are, in their career working in the private sector who go, this is not fulfilling. And again, we need the private sector. So it's not to poop
Absolutely.
on that. It's to say some of you are burnt out because you're wired for more missional people engagement. And I think a transition with your skills in private sector to come and experience that in the public sector, I think you'd find more fulfillment. And that's what we want. We want people fulfilled in whatever line of work they do. When did you do your master's right after you got your Bachelor of Science? When was the timeline of that? Because it's interesting, you get a business administration, an emphasis in marketing and communication. So to me on paper, it looks like you might have still weren't thinking necessarily local gov.
Oh no, I was always local gov, 100%. I did not do my master's right away. I went into the workforce. I was very fortunate to be able to get a job right out of college with the city of Arcadia. And it was 2 years into my career before I decided on what I was going to do my master's in. And that was actually very deliberate. I had seen a lot of people go straight through, but I'd also talked to a lot of people that had given the advice, like, go work in the field that you think you're going to work in, and then see if that's, what you want to study and what you want to do. And so I did. And had I not, I would have very likely gotten my master's in sports management, which I probably would have absolutely enjoyed as well. But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I gave it those 2 years. And in my first 2 years, one of the things that really struck me is, how do we best communicate with our residents and our constituents for our council? Like, how do we form those relationships? How do we hear what they want us to hear and digest it? How do we circle back on that? How do we make sure that we're sharing what we're doing and telling those stories? And I was really struggling finding the degree that did that. And I had studied for, see if I get this right, I had studied for the GRE, which was what you needed for most master's programs. And the more I kept looking for this, whether it was going to be I really didn't even know what the degree was going to be at that point in time. I just figured it would be somewhere along that GRE sense. I never thought it would be business. And then I started poking around a little bit more and realized that there were a number of marketing programs out there in the School of Business. And so literally at the last minute, I switched my registration for the GRE course, or not the course, but the actual test, to the GMAT for the business school, and just went with it. And and so I wanted to study that marketing piece of it. And at the time, business school was still very logistics, very widget focused. It was not as service-based as I know some of the programs are today. And little did I know that I would later be spending my career and I'd be a first-time city manager in a city that has a huge logistics and manufacturing sector to it. So, yes, I got to learn what I wanted to learn on that marketing and communication side of things. But I got this added bonus of having a better idea of understanding what goes on in that logistics and manufacturing world, which, I didn't know that it would help me today, but it does. So,
It's always interesting how that works, right? How our experiences shape more and have more insights than we even see as then. So tell us, you're at the City of Arcadia out of undergrad then. You're going to work in parks, a recreation coordinator. Talk to us about that experience. This is, again, 13 miles, I think, northeast of downtown LA. It's a population around 55,000. Tell us about your time there. And because we know eventually you're going to become a city manager, I think it's Bill Kelly was a city manager at that time, I think.
Yep.
Tell us about were you just focused? You seem a pretty focused person. So was it just my head is in parks? And it seems like in the story, maybe Bill Kelly awoken you a little bit to the city management position and tried to even woo you to him.
I don't know how you know this information, but yes, there is a piece of that in this story. So yes, I was 100% recreation, all into recreation, or at least recreation and special events, I should say. Special events had a huge part of my heart at this time too. And I was hired at Arcadia in a brand new position that had just been created. It was only a 3/4 time position though. So I got 3/4 time working, 3/4 time benefits. And then because I was young and lots of energy and didn't know what to do now that I didn't have homework, I was working part-time as a swim coach. And I was also working for a company that specialized in corporate events. And so doing some of the corporate side of things um, because I wanted to, because it filled my days and it filled up my buckets. And at some point, I decided I didn't want to juggle 3 jobs and very, naively thought, well, maybe I'll just quit the city job and go all in on, the private event stuff and be a private contract events worker. Um, and I had this plan in my head when I was going to go talk to the assistant director and tell her that, I had this vacation that had already been approved, but I didn't think I was going to come back from the vacation. And a part-time position that had been filled with somebody who had been there for quite a long time opened up, and they were getting ready to fly the part-time position again. So I went into the assistant director's office with a very different story, which was, hey, will you take that part-time position and add it to my position and make me a full-time employee? And then I'll stay instead of going on my vacation and quitting after. Sometimes I think about the stuff that went through my head and what I did, and I just am amazed that I'm just amazed. So she agreed, and she went to Bill Kelly and said, hey, I've got this employee. She's going to probably leave, but, can we take this part-time one and combine it into a full-time position? And they said yes. And it wasn't probably 6 months later that there was an opening in the city manager's office. And it was almost like there was still a recruitment, but I think it was like recruitment by invitation. And I was invited to apply for this. And no joke, the thoughts in my head were, why would I ever want to leave recreation and go into the city manager's office? And, I didn't know Bill much at all. I mean, we had met at a couple, all employee type of things. I didn't know what the city manager's office did. All I know really was that I would be leaving recreation, and why would I do that? So I didn't. I said no. I did not even apply for the job, and 20 some odd years later, here we are.
I love it. So this is so interesting because, again, Sierra Madre is where you grow up and you have such a connection to this place. Arcadia is just directly south from it, and that's where you start kind of local government. And then you head back to the place that kind of is home. I always love it. I'm just intoxicated by the story of, again, because working in your home, because it's not just working in your hometown, like at the mill or something. You're working in local gov, which is like the direct connection to all these people and all these places that have such significance. So it's so cool to give back to the place. So talk about that. I think you take on a similar role, recreation supervisor for Sierra Madre. And then now you're going to walk through all the way up to assistant city manager. So tell us about this story, these 11 years, I think it is, at the place where, again, it's not just a new city, it's the place that you called home. What was that like?
Yeah. So I had been a part-time employee for the city of Sierra Madre, at that point for probably 8 to 10 years, and then volunteering before that. So, I knew the people, and I think that was a huge draw for me, is that I did know the people. I did know the community. I was a recreation coordinator in Arcadia. There was an opportunity to be a recreation supervisor in Sierra Madre, so it would be a step up, and I applied and earned the job. And 3 weeks after I started the job, the director went on maternity leave. And as the recreation supervisor, I was the next highest person in line. And it was a department of 4 people, I think at the time, 4 full-time people at the time. And the city manager said, what do you think about being acting director? And I was like, I don't know, but if that's what you're asking me, like, sure. Oh my gosh, if anybody ever asks anybody like 3 weeks after becoming a coordinator to a supervisor, say no. Or don't, because it was such an opportunity to learn, but it was a lot of really hard lessons. I didn't really go to city council meetings before. I went to Sierra Madre, I wasn't writing. I was writing an occasional staff report for a commission in Arcadia, but now I'm presenting ordinances at a council in Sierra Madre, and there was so much I did not know going into that acting director role. I was very fortunate to have formed a quick, that the city manager and I, worked well together, and that he was willing to teach and walk me through like each of the steps. And I was also willing to ask questions along the way, because there was a whole lot of I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, I was in a place to just be disastrous. And so there was a lot of patience on his part and a lot of tears in my office with the door closed on my part. But it did set me up for what ended up being a quick acceleration through the steps in my career. But man, it was hard. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There are reasons why you you need experience to get into certain roles. Survived and glad for it, but it was not an easy time. Very humbling also, just to know that you've got to learn and that you got to hold on, and you did the best with what you got, and you just ask questions at every turn.
It's interesting that, again, in light of this story, a couple of things that come to mind is, again, it's not like cities just have redundancy and endless employees to just fill these gaps. Like, again, the director goes on maternity leave, and who's going to step up? And so sometimes people who are not ready get the call, and there's no really other option. And so, and yeah, I think that's the beauty. On one hand, I love how you said, like, someone from coordinator to supervisor to director in a matter of, it feels like weeks,
3 weeks.
months. Yeah. Right. That's pretty intense. And yet it's, I think, a constant theme on this podcast from these dynamic leaders that I have the pleasure of interviewing, saying yes, even when it's radically uncomfortable, is always the choice, because it will. And like you say, I love that you said this, it was incredibly painful because there's failure, there's frustration. And yet here's the city manager, I think it was John Gillison at the time, who's going to play a part later in your story. It gives you the patience. And I think that's the beauty of really great city managers, is they are so focused on a culture internally that impacts the external reality of the community. When you give the grace, yeah, there's things that have to be done. And it stinks when things are slow and there's failure. Now we got to report to council and to residents who don't understand the full picture. And yet it's great city managers who shoulder that heat, who give the patience, who give the guidance, and who allow, right? I think, people to grow. And look at your life. Your life has flourished because someone didn't just, get upset at you. I think that's a weak leader who their team reflects their identity, instead of remembering that a great leader says, this team is actually going to help us accomplish. A city manager can't do it all on their own. I think you'll be part of a very small city and very little impact. You've got to trust these people, and you've got to give them the space to grow. So you're going to do, you get thrown into the director position, and then you have these different positions, deputy director of community and personnel services. Again, I love, like, in these stories, every city kind of does it different. Every city has different positions. You could, an assistant city manager in one place could be a deputy in another, and that can be totally different. Walk us through. You're going to be the deputy director, then you become the director of this, then you become the director of human resources. Just walk us through those three positions, because that sounds unique.
Yes, absolutely, it was. Sierra Madre went through an instance where there were a number of exciting moments that turned into opportunities. We did not have anybody overseeing HR personnel, and John Gillison at the time was looking around and saying, "Well, I need somebody to do this. Like, it's not happening where it's supposed to be happening." And he's like, "Okay, it can be public works or it can be community services," based off of, what was going on in the organization at the time. He's like, "Throw it to community services. I think they can handle it. And it's just all people either way." Yeah. So we made up the name Community and Personnel Services. I was at that point promoted to be deputy director of this new department. The the community services director. I'd come back from maternity leave, obviously was the director, and she focused a lot on the HR side of things. And I was focused really a lot on the recreation side of things at that point. And went along. I mean, I took an HR course here. I learned something a little bit there, but my focus was still really on community services until she left to go be city manager in another city. And now I was the acting director of community and personnel services. By this point, Elaine Aguilar was the city manager in Sierra Madre. And I'm sure she did an evaluation and was like, okay, let's keep going as is. But they went out and did a full recruitment to see who was out there. I earned the position, but my strengths were really truly in community services. And in my head, my thought was, I'll stay in community services, and my deputy director, when I hired to fill my spot, can do the HR side of things. And then God laughed at me. And the first week of serving as the acting director for community and personnel services, I was served 5 lawsuits from the POA. And hence began a very, very storied time in my life of working through police negotiations, MOUs, investigations, serving as the PIO. It was a wild journey. And by the time it actually came to do the interview for the director position, I think I was well more entrenched and, on a crash course of learning HR, and felt better in it by that point in time than I did when I, put the original application in. But again, just, there was so much to learn, and there was so much to continue to uncover that we weren't doing. I remember sitting in Lieber Cassidy Whitmore, who does some great trainings, sitting in one of their sessions. They were talking about the regular rate of pay and the regular rate of pay. And then they start doing this math equation for the regular rate of pay. And I looked at my HR analyst and I was like, we don't do that. And I raised my hand and I'm like, can you explain the regular rate of pay to me? And every head in the place just turned and looked at me. And I was like, oh, we're in trouble. Which is an FLSA term for anybody that's how you calculate overtime, especially when it comes to police and fire. It can get very complicated. So it was this was just a treasure trove of opportunity to learn. Like every day there was something new. Like I said, it was, if that time as acting director of community services taught me anything about trial by fire, this was that times probably 10 or 15. Again, having Elaine as my city manager and walking by my side and answering my questions and giving me the leeway to go learn and explore and come back and share. I had an amazing police chief at the time, Larry Giannoni, who's still both Elaine and Larry are still very good friends. I don't think I could have made it through that whole time as director without them, because this is a team sport. There's nothing that happens, I think, in this profession that you can do on your own. And so I eventually did hire a deputy director. The deputy director did eventually oversee more of the community services side of things, and I stayed very well entrenched in human resources. I went on to earn my senior certificates in human resources. There were 2 communities at the time that were doing those certifications. And we started doing some advanced kind of strategic type planning. And we had a plan that was going to go to city council that was going to separate community and personnel services for the longevity of both programs, because there's nobody else out there that is a community and personnel services director, at least not that I've met yet. And I've met a lot of local government professionals. If there's one out there, let me know. We can swap stories. But so the council ended up approving part of the plan, but not the whole plan. So my title changed from director of community and personnel services to director of HR. But I was still helping oversee a lot of community services, which was now for a moment an orphan under the city manager. But we figured it out, right? Like we kept working. And then, yeah.
I have this unique pleasure, this unique opportunity to meet with thousands of local government leaders from across the nation every year through conferences and workshops and the podcast. Just these interviews, these conversations are just so insightful. And one of the things I have learned about local government leaders is this: the best leaders are lifelong learners, not because they have all the answers. It's because they understand that leadership, that journey of leadership, is never finished. Every challenge, every difficult conversation, every budget season, every organizational change or disruption is another opportunity to grow. That's why this summer we're doing something different inside the Municipal Leadership Development Circle. We're launching a special summer series called Stories That Shape Leaders. You know that every week I take a best-selling book, usually a business book, and we break down its insights and apply them to local gov. This summer, we're taking biographies, memoirs, timeless leadership books that don't necessarily fall into those typical business, culture, strategy kind of genre. And we're going to explore the lives, the decisions, the failures, challenges, the lessons of leaders who navigated incredible adversity, who had to build trust when hope was fleeting, who inspired others not only to dream but to take action, and who left a lasting impact. Leadership isn't shaped just through strategies and frameworks alone. It is shaped through stories. Stories that challenge assumptions, stories that expand our perspective, stories that help us become the leaders our communities need us to be. When you join the MLDC, you unlock the entire summer series, but you unlock even more. You unlock the weekly leadership content, the live mastermind sessions, the nationwide community of local government leaders, and all the MLDC resources, not just for the summer, but for the rest of 2026. If you are looking for a place to continue growing this summer while connecting with leaders who understand the unique challenges of local government, I would love to invite you to join us. Learn more at haltingwinter.com/MLDC or simply use the link in the show notes. Now, back to the conversation. Well, I want to look at one thing there, because this is such an important thing, that the twofold thing of Elaine, first of all, who's now the city manager during this time. It seems like, again, you're in this position where you have no HR experience. You are like, fish in a whole new, going from saltwater to freshwater. And talk about the twofold thing of a city manager. It seems like this has been a theme that's resonated lately. Great city managers protect leadership development for their staff. They know that we have so much to do. Everyone is overworked. Everyone is being tasked with things. Oftentimes, city management isn't like, or I should say local government, especially in leadership, in any position of leadership, you're given things all the time that are going to stretch you, expand you, where you get overwhelmed and like, I don't know how to do this, but it's got to get done. It's not like you can just go hire a bunch of people to come help you. And so the freedom, or I guess the investment into staff, but also then the resources. I try to highlight all the time the smallest places, the state associations. I'm sure SHRM, with HR, but like things like I know it with city management. I'm sure we'll get to it. Like the CCMF, the ASC, I guess, MMASC, yes, the Southern California City Management. But there's ones for all kinds. There's planning associations. There's every kind of area of local government usually has a state association or a regional association. Talk about the importance of that when you've now been in two different positions, feeling like you're head over heels. Yeah. What did it look like? Can we talk to the support structure? Because I think a lot of people think, well, I'll get this degree and then I'll have the knowledge. There's no degree that's really going to help in local gov because it's all expansive and it's all changing too with different policies. Talk about the leadership development aspect, and then those organizations, not only for education, but also for support, just human support.
I will say what the degree does is it teaches you how to research, teaches you how to write, it teaches you how to think critically, and it shows, an employer that you can do all things and get it done, right? You can start and finish something. But yeah, to explain all the intricacies of what go on, absolutely not. I was very involved with CPRS, the California Park and Recreation Society, when I was in Arcadia and then moved over to Sierra Madre. That largely got outpaced by, honestly, just any leadership training I could find. I did not, in my time in Sierra Madre, ever really have, I didn't really have that professional community. Went to just about, like I said, every training opportunity that Liebert, Cassidy, and Whitmore would offer. I went to any kind of, like, Cal Pelra had a intensive something. Our JPIA had a number of training programs. I at that time immersed myself in the actual trainings. I did not get overly involved in a whole lot of boards or the networking, and that ended up being hard. I mean, that led to some really lonely moments because I didn't have a peer group that knew what it was like to go through the firing of a police officer, which is a near impossible task and incredibly painful to boot. I missed out on some of that because every dollar I had in Sierra Madre, they were incredibly strained, went to learning. It went to, like, the next practical thing of how I was going to get up to speed and be a true professional expert areas. Um, and and I think I was successful in that. I think that approach worked well for me in terms of getting the knowledge of doing the job. But like I said, it did leave a void where I really could have used some peer support that I'm not sure that I even knew that void existed at the time. We talked about Bill Kelly earlier, and he did a stint as interim city manager in between John and Elaine in Sierra Madre. And I remember having a conversation with him telling me to go get involved in MMASC. And I looked into it and I could not find, like, at the time, there just wasn't an easy door to go through to get there. And because it wasn't an easy door at the time, and this will play if we get to the Cal ICMA stories, because there was no easy door to get through, like, it got lost. And in my head, that sounded like way more fun than it was learning, and I needed to put my dollars towards learning. Again, important lessons for how we tell our stories about the importance of our organizations, because I am a huge proponent of both personal and professional development and building those peer support networks, finding mentors, being a mentor, and the like. So I wasn't involved in MMASC during those normal years. I was not involved in ICMA. Elaine was not involved in ICMA. She had been previous to Sierra Madre, but again, our dollars were so tight. We had to be very choosy about where they went. And so we were learning.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's the reality. And I think it helps, I think, the organizations and associations hear that, because again, how do we be creative and flexible and think about, like what you just said, the doors can't just be to the conferences or, the training events that are, 3 hours away or whatever it is. Like, and again, I get it. We're all stretched. We're all stretched for time and for dollars. We got to make things happen.
Absolutely.
But we also, I think that's the key. I hear that over and over. It's why I even have I have a leadership development program, but it's not because I'm trying to, like, that's my thing. I just see the need for network. And I think that if you can justify the professional development, but you really, it's there for personal. I just want to make sure you never have that thing to feel alone. Because I think local government, the higher you are in leadership, the way more likelihood that you feel totally on an island alone for multiple reasons. The fear of, again, you're the only one in your city that's that role. And it's just the weight of the responsibility. And now with incivility and just a lot of, I think, the negative pressures of getting it wrong is hard. We need to be, connected to people who get that, who feel that same weight. Talk about,
I would say to that point, I practice vulnerability a lot. So here we go. I have absolutely the best team surrounding me that I could. I am very fortunate to have an assistant city manager and 3 deputy city managers who I just absolutely adore and work really, really well with. I have an amazing department head and management team that are just rock stars, and we get along, and, like, I have the dream team without a doubt. I have a network through ICMA. I've got, peers that I've met, across the country and across the world to some extent. And I've got really fabulous mentors that have been in this role. And I find myself, yesterday included, sitting sometimes in that chair being like, I am so alone. Like I feel so alone. And so even when we have all the best networks, I think it's important to recognize that there is just some of that is incredibly innately part of this role, that it's a hard one to describe. And I don't know that I've been sitting in it long enough to be able to dissect to why that happens. And maybe it is when you do delegate well, they're letting the people that should be making decisions, they're doing them. So you don't have to, I again, haven't fully diagnosed it yet. And, this isn't the first time. And a few months ago when I was having a similar moment, I had a colleague turning friend that I knew had just started as a brand new city manager. And my response to that one was to send her a text message and be like, hey, how are you doing today? Because if it's happening to me with somebody who's got an incredible network and resources, it's going to happen to anyone and probably everyone. And I just want to put out there for our listeners, for those that sit in it, you're not alone, even though you feel alone. For those that don't understand what it really is, and you look up at that city manager in your life is magical, like to know that those things exist. And just for everybody, like life has ups and life has downs. And I think the more upfront and honest and we can share the downs just as much as the ups, we build stronger teams, we build stronger communities. And again, for me, it all comes back to that. So thank you for my little sidestep PSA there.
I loved it. It's vulnerability. And I think that's where the city manager position is unique, because it's not just now, you were, and we're going to talk about this. You're going to become the ACM in Sierra Madre. You're going to become the deputy city manager in Rancho Cucamonga, where you are now. But those, we can obviously think, oh yeah, you're just kind of, you're over a department. Now you're ACM, you're over multiple departments, and now you're the CM, you're just over it all. And the weight of that position is so radically different, because it's not just being over the organization, it's dealing with electeds, it's dealing with the residents. You are the face now, at least internally, to those who know what a city manager is. You are no longer just, Elisa, you are the city manager that I call it, you're on this municipal tightrope, and that three-headed snake of electeds and staff and residents all want different things. And you, as someone we've talked about, mission driven and so passionate about caring for people in this community, that can feel just like you're being pulled in 1,000 directions. And yet you're kind of like that. I think that aloneness is because you are more of a face than you are really a person at times. And especially when I think the negative heat comes and you're like, gosh, I care so much. Do not you see how much I care? Can I at least get a little, even if you disagree with the choice, can you not? And I think it's the servant leader's struggle. And why I connect so much, I think, with city managers is because I think the life of a city manager is very similar to the life of a pastor, which I was for 10 years. I think that public face, it didn't matter where I was, whether I was on the stage behind a pulpit, if I was at the gym or a grocery store, or even in my backyard. Anyone who sees me at that moment sees Pastor Seth. They do not see Seth. I could never really, you kind of lose yourself. Like, am I that job? And that's the other thing. Pastoring doesn't shut off. People call me at all hours of the night and expect me to be on. City management, I think, is the same. You have not only evening meetings and weekend events, but you are all the time, that phone rings, and you don't get to just be Elisa. You have to be city manager. And, it is a real struggle. It's a dynamic that I don't think any other position experiences.
At least not one that I've had yet.
Well, tell us about, you become the assistant city manager, and then you move to Rancho Cucamonga. John Ellison again comes back in your story, and it seems like does he pull you over? And what was that? What was it like now to be in kind of the city management office and not in a direct department?
So great opportunity, Elaine's assistant city manager, which was excellent. I really, really loved working with her. But I knew I wanted to grow. And frankly, like there was already the talk and the whispers of like, oh, when Elaine retires, Elisa will be city manager. And I think I was in my, I don't know how old I was. I think it was in my 30s. I was probably I was in my mid 30s when I came to Rancho. So I was in my early 30s when these kind of whispered things kind of started. And I found myself being like, I do not want to be city manager. Like, this is not what I am interested in. And, I saw the pressure that, Elaine went through firsthand and the impacts of those calls that come in at all sorts of times and the name calling and, all of that. And to have it happen to somebody who is so full of love for service and really wanting to do what's best. And then just watch, you can just watch it eat at people. And that woman is amazingly resilient and just such a huge role model for me. But I did not want to be city manager. And I did not want to be city manager in Sierra Madre, especially, at that time. Like it just, at some point, going to Sierra Madre to be the recreation coordinator because I knew everybody as assistant city manager, knowing everybody got incredibly personal. And I had grown up there and I lived in Pasadena for most of the time I was in Sierra Madre. But when I was assistant city manager, we bought our home in Sierra Madre. And all of a sudden, work and life were one and the same. And there was no break or separation. There wasn't even a commute because I could walk to work just as quickly as I could get in the car and drive to the office. And so, I still had kept in touch with John over the years and there had been a couple different jobs in Rancho Cucamonga that I had looked at, applied for, pulled my name out of the, ring type of situation because it was far, especially when you can walk to work. And then the deputy city manager position opened up and it was overseeing libraries, community services, city clerk's office and the city manager's office, which had our legislative and marketing and all, programs in there. And felt like it was all of my favorite things. And I got a text from him saying, hey, a job opened up. Take a look and see if you're interested. I hope you apply. And then it was like radio silent. And so I did and, talked it through with my husband and because, this would be taking on a very different lifestyle with adding a commute. But it also would be a very different lifestyle because I wouldn't be this life would be separate. Like work and home would have much more of a break, 45-minute break, if nothing else. And so we decided that I'd go for it. That recruitment process was the second hardest one I have ever gone through. We got like 6 or 7 supplemental questions on a Thursday and they were due on Monday. And I felt like I spent the entire weekend doing my college thesis all over again. And then, the series of interviews and all of that. It was rough. Like I said, it took a lot of time and I didn't have, all the institutional knowledge. So I'm spending like hours just like researching and finding out what the staff report template looked like because one of them was write a staff report about this thing. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to write a staff report, it needs to look like a staff report. So let's format it like a staff report. And so I came over and there were 2 other deputy city managers. So it was a city manager, 3 deputy city managers. And it was a whole new world. I would explain to people that in Sierra Madre, I could put out a fire before anybody even realized that it was kindling. And in Rancho, there were moments where I felt like I was in the middle of the inferno and I had no idea that anything was on fire. I was like, oh, it's a little warm. So again, just an opportunity to learn so much, going from a city of less than 10,000 residents to a city of, over 175,000 residents. The land mass, equally, there's a project that is in progress here that you could pick up the city of Sierra Madre and plop it into this, piece of land that this project's on. So everything was different, and yet there was so much that was also the same. And Rancho Cucamonga still very much has that small town feel, people to it. Even some of our processes were still, similar. Um, and I mean, and it was drinking out of a fire hose for almost 2 years. And John had given me a piece of advice, but if it wasn't for my first day, it was my first week, that said, you got to give it 18 to 24 months. And like, just give it 18 to 24 months, because you got to go through cycles. You got to see through the things. And I'm glad he did, because at about month 12, I was like, I don't know that I've got the chops for this. Like, this is, there are so many fingers and spiders, and like, how do you capture it all in your head, and how do you keep running with it? And, in that time, I think I hired all new directors for each one of my departments except for one. And the one that I didn't hire had just been hired a few months before I started. So, we were like a baby team, like figuring out this organization together. And then just what an opportunity to learn.
Well,
it was hard.
Yeah. I think, and that's where I love this reality. This is why I love this podcast. You get to kind of look back and remember, like, man, these were, the challenges, and yet here you are. And I think that's the thing. People who continue to grow, and if you really want impact, you got to press into challenge. And I think if you just go after what's comfortable, you'll miss out on the real impact. And I think that's the testament of your story. You are a person of great impact, but it's because you've put yourself into positions where you didn't go, okay, I got to tap out. This is too much. You continued to learn and press in. And what an encouraging, inspirational trait to others to go, again, that's the important thing. It's interesting in your story. I've wanted to ask a couple of times, because you mentioned, I think you said, when you were in Sierra Madre, your director, I think you were deputy, and then you became the director because the director became a city manager. And so it's interesting. You can keep seeing these people become city manager, and yet you're like, no, thank you. And yet
because I saw what they were going through.
Right. Well, exactly. You see, but it's also, I had on Opal Malden Jones. I don't know if you know Opal. She's such an amazing woman. And she was mentioning, like, I didn't know, because I never saw anyone who looked like me, that was Black, that was a woman, who was in these positions. And she said it's so powerful to be able to see someone so you can go, oh, that I never thought, that's an opportunity. I could do that, even if you don't want to do it. I think we can miss out on that. And here you are, there's these people, that director, Elaine, and all of a sudden it's like, and then you have people like John who give you opportunity and who give you the support, even when it feels overwhelming, you want to tap out, who go, no, we're in this together. Let's do it. And it leads to this moment. Here's the moment where someone who has said, no way, becomes the city manager in December 2025. What was so compelling that pulled Elisa out of the never into the now?
Well, my husband says he always knew it was going to happen. So, I think it became about time and place, and probably a little bit of selfishness of who would I have to, you hear it all the time, who would I have to train to do that? John made the decision a few years ago to go we had the 3 deputies, and to select an ACM. And that was going to be part of the succession plan. And so it was an understanding that becoming ACM, you would be learning all of the things to be best set up to be able to be the city manager. So should the city council want to go in that direction, that was the hardest interview process I have ever been through. But I went through it. It was all internal. So I went through it with peers, and, there's so many different ways to approach that. But one of the things that was really cool about that for me was, like, I am very comfortable if it's me, but if it's not, like, I really respect the people that I'm going through this with, and I would be happy to lead under, any one of their directions. Ultimately I did earn that spot and spent a few years getting to be assistant city manager before becoming city manager. But there were some hard conversations, especially, that my husband had to walk through me through, on, okay, you've said you never want to do this. What's changing now? And, what is it? What is the impact that this has on our lives? And, are we prepared, to wake up one day and just have a council being like, sorry, we don't like the clothes that you're wearing anymore. You're no longer city manager. You know, and so I don't know if there was a complete switch, but um, as much as I say it's about the community, about the community, about the community, it really is. Like my service in local government is about the community. But I had a really great conversation with Jorge Garcia, city manager in Pismo Beach. And it was probably one of the first conversations, like we knew all the same people, but it was probably one of the first times like we really sat down and were talking. And he kept pushing me on this community idea. He's like, no, but why are you city manager? But why are you city manager? He's like, you can do the community stuff and all, why are you city manager? And, um, you know, ultimately it became because I love to lead good people. And so I think, maybe I couldn't have articulated it until Jorge gave me that, all of those prompts and pushes. But I think that something inside of me knew that I wanted to do this and in this role because I love to see people grow. And I love to, there is a passion for leading in service to the community that fills me up. So far, it's been an absolutely amazing opportunity to do that.
It's so cool. And man, we could talk about, there's so many other things I could go into. I want to be mindful of your time. Let's close with, we kind of have mentioned these organizations before, but I think they're so important, especially when you get into the CM role, which then has just a radically different level of weight and responsibility on it. So these organizations that, again, professional development, but personal connection, because again, you're the only city manager. And I think there's a reality too, where department heads, even though they might be the only public works, they can kind of rally together inside the organization and kind of, share and vent and do that thing. The city manager really, you can have some connection that way with your assistants and deputy managers, but at the end of the day, like it's kind of like a conductor. I was a conductor for part of my professional life as well. And I loved my orchestra. I loved the section leaders, and we had a unique kind of connection. But at the end of the day, I was the conductor, and I had management. I had audience members, donors, and the kind of that world where the conductor kind of lives alone. And so these organizations, like we said, the MMASC, I think the CCMF we had Ken Striplin on the other day. Amazing. We're about to have Ken Polskamp on, who, again, just these titans of city management. And yet they're so focused then they could easily absorb themselves in just Santa Clarita and what's going on there. And yet they say the need for, let's bring people together. The ICMA, you're an executive board member. Let's talk about the ICMA, because again, there's ICMA California, and we had Peter Pernahead on a while ago, and he just, talking about the need for this. Talk about the ICMA as now it's a global, organization, and yet, and it's coming to Long Beach in October. We're going to highlight that, which is, a neighbor to you. But what does it mean to be a part of something that can be so big? And maybe it makes, I think my assumption is a lot of people in smaller places go, oh, the ICMA is just so big. And it's just like, I'd just be lost in that. What encouragement would you give for people to be a part of both the small organizations, associations, but also something as big as the ICMA?
So I mentioned that ICMA was not something that I had the opportunity to partake in previous to coming to Rancho. And I did sign up for our membership almost as soon as I started. And, you talk about getting lost in an organization. I did nothing with my ICMA membership for that first year. I didn't even go to the annual conference, somewhat because there was nobody there being like, hey, come along with me. It wasn't, we had members in the organization, but it wasn't like the one thing that everybody did together or anything. And so I saw the opportunity for leadership ICMA come across my computer, and it was something that I had looked into when I was in Sierra Madre. And so I remember running down to John's office because like the application was like due that night or something. I'd be like, can I do this? Will you sign this? I'll move my conference money around and do this or whatever it was. And that was, my gateway drug into ICMA. I had an amazing class of people that I still chat and text with. And, during COVID really provided me that sounding board network across the country of like, we were all fighting the same thing and dealing with the same stuff. And, we would have regular, happy hours just to decompress on, what was going on in life. And that was really, really powerful and very impactful during that time. But, I joined Leadership ICMA because I had this expensive membership and I didn't know what to do with it. And I wanted to be able to learn like what were all of these offerings. And that fortunately ended up being a very great avenue into that. Similarly, we were at our city managers conference in California, and there was a fundraiser or really a networking dinner for Cal ICMA. And so I walked up to the organizers after, Tony Winnie being one of them, and said, "Hey, I'd like to get involved. Like, how can I volunteer?" And they're like, "Here, join our committee." Next thing you know, I was planning special events for Cal ICMA for a number of years and eventually moved up into the presidential role there. And I mentioned earlier about, the not always feeling like the doors are open for anybody to walk through. And one of the things we did when I was vice president or president of Cal ICMA is we did a survey of our membership. And the one thing that we heard back over and over and over again was that I don't know how to get involved. I don't, it just seems like it's all, just people pulling in their friends or whatever, like, how do you get on the board? How do you get involved? And so we changed our whole focus on how we were communicating and how we were getting the word out of how to get involved. Because I think to some extent, it wasn't that it was any kind of hidden curtain. It was just that, it was whoever walked up and said, "Hey, I want to volunteer," that, ended up volunteering. And so we really worked to open up those doors so that it didn't feel like you had to be invited into that door, but there was now a path through that. And so that board service grew into, applying for, being encouraged to apply for the ICMA board. It had been something that through Leadership ICMA sparked an interest to become a part of, but it was something that I thought I would do later in my career. But I had a couple of people really sit me down and tell me why this was the time to apply. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I think I'm going to become city manager during that time period if everything happens the way I think it's going to. I'm like, I'm not sure if that's a great idea. And let me tell you right now, as I'm preparing to go to DC tomorrow for our board meeting, I'm like, oh man, this city manager thing and board service is definitely a level up than being ACM and doing board service. No regrets on doing both at all, but it's taking some leveling up. And I think, we've just been really fortunate as a board with ICMA is to be able to have, to take some things that could have seemed like that they would be devastating, and continually turn them into opportunities to make the organization stronger, to connect more with our members, and to just realign with what our values are. I mean, it's a continual process. Nothing happens overnight, right? But I've been very privileged to serve with the board that I'm serving with because they just are. Everybody is very focused on how do we do this in best in service of our membership, which is then in best in service for our communities. Something that I find very special. So, and yes, the conference is coming up. We had the highest number of registrants the first day that I think we've ever had. So yes, the struggle is real to get a hotel room, but there is a really great lineup of educational opportunities, networking opportunities. I'm very excited to be part of the California contingent this year while we host the conference here in California in Long Beach.
It's so cool. I think you mentioned something, the idea of becoming city manager and serving on the executive board and just the time. And I think that's one of the things from the ICMA level. I mean, I've had Mike Land and both Andy Peterson, Mike Land's the president, Andy Peterson, president-elect, and I don't know how they do it, like with their travel. And yet that's the reality of most of these state associations, Cal ICMA, MMASC, MMANC, and whatever state association you're a part of, it's usually volunteer run, organizing all these things. And it's not like you guys don't already have full plates above. You're juggling 3 full plates. And so it is, we need board members. We need people to serve. So that's even a call for you. I love this idea too of if you say, well, I don't know what my association can really do for me. Why don't you start by doing something? Why don't you call and say, how could I be involved? And that might be the open gate, because I think you're all servants. You're all kind of need something to do to kind of pull you in sometimes. And so it could be a great way. It's just to say, where can I want to be a part. Give me something to do so I have a reason to be a part.
And it's not that any of us need more things to do,
No.
but we do need, we do need that personal connection, right? We do need that network.
So true. Well, I want to be mindful of your time. I'll close with one last question for you, because we've kind of all encompassing talk about this, whether it's the role, whether it's the associations. I have kind of the most requested keynote I give is called Balance is BS. How do you thrive in the tension of municipal life and leadership? Because there is no such thing as work-life balance. I think it's the worst thing that's ever been talked about, because balance really says, how do I please others, instead of going, who am I? What's my tank? What do I need to be intentional about? And then the reality is, balance kind of gives this idea that life is static, and life is not static. Your kids have different seasons. You have different seasons. Your work is going to have different budget season. And then how does Elisa make sure that her tank is full? How does she, not that it's full, that it has something in it. How do you, in a role that never shuts off, how have you struggled, and how have you found maybe some wins with boundaries and just with making sure that you are a person before you're a professional?
Like you said, balance is BS, but how do we do that? And I think the reality of it is, for any manager, it's going to change season to season. I'm in my first 6 months, and it's, been a honeymoon phase. And, I hope and pray that it gets to stay a honeymoon phase for many, many years. But, as far as the council goes, my first sit down with them was a series of questions that, created boundaries. But understanding what everybody's expectations were first before setting those boundaries. And so I had asked them all the same questions, and those splintered off into other conversations, but gave me a really good view for each one of them, what they were going to be looking for. And so that created a document that, we all share. But, it actually started even earlier than that, because in my interview, I very specifically told them that I would give them just about everything, but I wouldn't give them my health or my husband. I think I actually had husband first, my husband or my health. Because without those two things, I'm not going to be much good to them. I won't be able to do my job in service well. So, the boundaries things is real, and I've worked very hard not to email council or staff, really, honestly, on Saturdays and Sundays. If I make sure, if I'm making contact communication on those 2 days, that it is for very good, important reasons. Similarly, I try to limit my communications out after, 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Some of that so that I can be present to focus, on my husband, on my family. And also because it's very important to me that my team does that. And if I voice that as something that's important, I need to back that up with my actions. And the rest is just, it's seasons. It's summer. It always seems a little bit easier in summer because you can work till we have a 7 to 6 work day, so I can work till 6 or 6:30 and I can get home and it's still light for another hour or two. Winter's just harder. Just the light factor is real. So there's no magic bullet. Everybody's going to do it different. I've done it different at different times in my life. The one that I'd really love to figure out how to get more in is that exercise and that gym time. And I haven't figured that out, but I think I'm almost good on the sleep one. So sleep was my first important one. Exercise is the next. But I know it'll continue to shift, and it's just something to be aware and cognizant and upfront and honest about. But, those partners in your life, whether it's your spouse or whether it's your assistants and deputies, not having the conversations is actually what I think makes that balance unbalanced. and have the conversations with those around you. My executive assistant's always telling me to say no. Even when I was like, okay, I'm going to do this podcast. She's like, no, you don't have time to add another thing. Yes, I do. Yeah, but you have that support system around you that also helps hold you accountable. And as you do for them, we care about the humans first. We design for people first.
Absolutely. I love it. You said something that I want to highlight because it might be the gem that city managers listening now, if they've listened to the end, need to take away. It is because one of the things you said, you sat down and you had the electeds give you their expectations. I find that most people running on burnout are living out of what they feel are expectations, but they're actually assumptions because we do not have the conversations. And so, and you might feel like, gosh, I'm a city manager. I need to talk to my council, but, you're all kind of like, you feel like I've got to go tell them that this is what new boundaries are. But that's such an easy way to go, hey, I feel like I'm operating out of assumptions. I want to hear what your actual expectations are because we do need to have a conversation about boundaries, but let's get everything on the table first. And so that's an easy first step because you're not telling what you have to do. You're gathering the information to then make a strategic plan. And what you may find is people don't expect you to be the first one in, last one out, always available, but you're doing that. And so you're actually the source of your burnout. So I think that's a great practice. You can take a first step. And I love that you said that.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisa, for sharing your life.
I say you are on par now. You can be my publicist for for name branding.
I love it. Well, your insights, your leadership journey, what an inspiration! And I can't wait to meet you in person on my next travels through the area.
Thank you, Seth, for the invitation and for the time together, and continue to have fun.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you. The stories we share here on the Halting Winter podcast remind us where government really lives, locally, right here in our cities, our counties, the communities that shape our everyday life. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe and share the episode to help these stories reach others. I'm Seth Winterhalter. You can find me at HaltingWinter.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.